Well, good evening, and I'd like to call to order this planning meeting for the town of Saugeen Shores. And our first order of business is additions, deletions, or amendments to the agenda, and we have nothing under that. The next item is a declaration of pecuniary interest, and I'll remind every member of your responsibility. Nothing under that. Then we have minutes of the April 16th, 2018 planning meeting. It's been moved by Vice Deputy Mayor Huber, seconded by Deputy Mayor Charbonneau, that the Planning Committee minutes dated April 16, 2018 are hereby approved as circulated. Is there any errors or omissions? All in favor? That's carried. So the next item on the agenda is public meetings. This evening we have a public meeting on economic development and community improvement plan, and I believe first our Jay is going to present a report, and then we'll open it up to any comments from the public and the committee. So please go ahead, Jay.
Okay, thank you very much. And you've been kept in the loop over the last few months on this, leading back from January. So just as a bit of a background, the Economic Development Strategic Plan from January, when it was received by Council, contained a number of recommendations, including the preparation of a CIP. And so over the last few months, we've been in consultation with our consultant and a number of agencies, as well as a broad consultation with the public in a variety of means and methods, have come forward with the draft that you're being presented with tonight. And that is to create a scheme, to use Councillor Mayette's language, of financial incentives, a town purchasing policy for particular purposes, and a streamlining recommendation that would facilitate at least some of the recommendations from the Economic Development Strategic Plan. And so, if I may, if you can indulge me just for a few minutes, is that we're just beginning to see evidence of sustained growth in Saugeen Shores over the next 10, 12 years. And I've identified a few things that we've been learning about over the last few months, is that our growth projections that we rely on are just not very good. In fact, we're seeing growth about 80% higher than we initially anticipated. So by the end of the next decade, we anticipate another 5,000 people in our community. But with that sustained growth, we also have some challenges that we're facing. And so on affordable housing, even our official plan targets 30% of our all new housing to be affordable housing. And that would be just on the conservative side, about 32 dwelling units per year, which need to be affordable. And I don't think the market is able to fill that need. And I think we should, through this plan, support our fair share of affordable housing and to meet our targets. On nuclear support services, the MCR gets fully underway just at the beginning of 2020. And so contractors need to be choosing their sites and building within the next 6 to 10 months. And so it's important to ensure that they're, that they have Saugeen Shores high on their list of where they would like to locate. On hotel and visitor accommodations, these are also supportive of the ancillary activities of the nuclear support sector, but they also can be used to support the growing tourism sector and also support a strong sports tourism program, which we've identified in our recreation master plan as something we'd like to consider and look at. On manufacturing, we don't have a significant base, but it's important to establish a better balance for economic development, that we have a broad range of economic activities and not just what we currently get, but that we should also do something to encourage those forms of development that we lack. And so given this context, as briefly as I've outlined it, it's important to establish and guide our expected growth in the beginning to ensure continued success in the long term. And as I've noted, it's actually the mission of the Economic Development Strategic Plan to establish a balanced, vibrant economy through managed growth, strategic investment, and collaboration. But adopting the CIP is just part of a more comprehensive slate of recommendations to ready the town and achieve the mission of the Economic Development Strategic Plan. So it's to be sure that this is not the only action the town should take to ensure its economic future, but that this should just form part of a large, as I said, a slate of recommendations. So just so I can direct your attention to the actual plan, I'm going to be specifically referring to sections 8, 9, 11, 12, and 13. The other sections you've seen in one form or another with our existing CIPs. And so just turning to section 11 first was our eligible activities that we'd like to target, and that is affordable housing projects greater than or equal to 5 units, or projects which provide a secondary dwelling in a single detached dwelling. Hotels and visitor accommodations greater than or equal to 50 rooms and containing meeting space, nuclear sports service businesses, and manufacturing businesses. These are not new to you. These have been in our draft since the beginning. And in terms of the programs, and this is also referred to in my report, we've identified 4 financial incentive programs that we'd like to establish in the town and finance through an implementation program. One is to reduce the payment of development charges for the applicable developments. One is to be able to assist developers with the cost of local improvements, or in other words, if they need to install a sidewalk, are there ways that the town can incentivize the development by providing that construction? We could also enable the town to reduce municipal property taxes for development for a limited time, and we would also consider reducing or eliminating other municipal fees like building permits or landfill tipping fees, for example. The plan also contains a policy to enable the town to acquire or sell land for the purposes of attaining the objectives in the CIP. So that could be, for example, we sell a lot of surplus land. The proceeds from that sale could be put in a reserve to support these plans, or this plan. And we're also recommending a streamlining ability to delegate approval of site plans to town staff, so it reduces the time taken to go through council if it's one of these projects. So in the future, if this is adopted, we'd like to bring forward an implementation plan for the remainder of 2018, because I think it's important to keep moving on this, and that there's a consideration that to support the economic development, we should be ready immediately and not wait till the 2019 budget rather. So there's my presentation, and Mr. Mayor, you can turn it over to you.
Okay. So this is a public meeting. I guess if anybody's got a question of Jay, what he spoke about now, then ask him for a clarification. If not, I will then, if there is, that's fine. But we'll open it to the public for any public inputs. Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jay, could you define what affordable would be, please, in terms of rental cost or purchase cost?
In our official plan, it defers to the provincial policy as to what it means to be affordable, but it means generally that it's affordable to that it represents no more than 30% of annual income. That your housing costs represent no more than 30% of your annual income, and that's affordable for wealthy individuals or less wealthy individuals. So we collect data from StatsCan and the County of Bruce to determine sort of, and this is where it gets very detailed, but we get information from CMHC, the county, and StatsCan that can identify the median income, for example, in the town, and then we would be able to implement, a price point based on that income for what would be affordable. And so what we're looking at now is about $900 a month or less for rental. That depends on whether it's 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, 3 bedroom. So, or an ownership of less than $300,000, a purchase price of less than $300,000. And we intend to present more specific details on that implementation at the next meeting if the plan is adopted in the future.
Councillor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So to follow up on that, even as we speak, I'm hearing that homes are entering onto the market that are less than $300,000, and a bidding war takes place. And before you know it, they're selling over $300,000. So how we get engaged in this and control the outcomes, if that's what we're trying to do, or work with the outcomes. Affordable housing is if I can, Mr. Mayor, is the subject of a number of points that I wanted to make, and I'm going to limit my comments to affordable housing tonight. So we've got a lot of good words here. Provide for the development of affordable housing, and we've asked for the definition, and we've got the definition. Then it says in a variety of forms and locations. So my questions are, provide for the development. So I've asked this repeatedly, and I'm going to ask it again. Are we going to entertain any form of open house discussion with those people who are knowledgeable that can provide insights as to how somebody in our position can make change? Fort McMurray is an example that I heard where they had to change the way they did business because there were more requests for people to live than they had inventory for, obviously, and the price just kept going up, including rental space. So making sure we have enough inventory and I'm hearing that as well. I was at a business meeting for the company I work with, and the people in the room were discussing whether they wanted to live in Kincardine or in Port Elgin, and they were discussing the differences, and I actually sat there quite quiet listening and trying to understand what they were saying. And they were saying they were a young family moving from Toronto, and they didn't think they could afford Port Elgin, and yet they thought that Port Elgin was where they wanted to be. And I'm saying Port Elgin because they said Port Elgin, not because I'm saying it. And so when we talk about changing a variety of forms and locations, are we talking about existing zoning, or are we talking about being able to take a large chunk of open space and saying this piece of open space, if we do it right, could be the next affordable housing development that's built upon a model that's given to us by Bruce County or is given to us by the province? What do those models look like? So are we inside our current zoning system, or are we going to be allowed to go outside of our current zoning system? Are we going to be allowed to get outside of our box, or are we going to have to work inside of it, is what I'm asking. Variety of forms. Are we going to allow CCAN development or double-wide trailer development? In places like Fort McMurray and Calgary and other places, they actually built a CCAN residential development, allowed people to live in CCAN conversions. Are we going there? Do we think this is something that we could work with? So I'm throwing some things on the floor, table, whichever way you want to look at it, and I'm saying that I'm just one person with some crazy ideas, but there are people who are very knowledgeable about these things, and they're happening in other parts of the world and other parts of our country and our province. So, and I'm in particularly how you facilitate this geared to income concept. Like, I know that Bruce County has a model. They built structures in our community, and they're following that model. And there are people who still believe, there are taxpayers in this community who still believe that that model is flawed and it is being misused. So how do we control the model? So I'm just hitting on some of the points that I've written down here that have been bothering me for some time, and around the term affordable housing. So for me, this community improvement plan, the CIP as it's written, it talks about affordable housing and then it just stops. There is no background document. There's no descriptions. There's no anything else. So if I knew a developer who wanted to come into the office tomorrow and say, I got a piece of property, I want to build some affordable housing, are we just going to let the developing world decide what that's going to look like, or are we going to coach and mentor and guide? And if we are, what is that going to look like? So those are the issues that I would like to see some more depth and breadth to before we go public with or approve this CIP in its final form. That's my opinion. Thank you.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
I'm not too sure. Do you want us to have our discussion, or there's a...
That if you wanted any clarification from what Jay has said, then fine. Then we'll go to the public, and then we'll have the committee's discussion.
I
Go ahead.
have comments, so I'll wait then.
So then, any questions for clarification on any further questions for clarification, Councillor Dave Mayette?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I'm very excited about the concept of what what's being proposed here. I think what I can see happening is us as a council, we don't necessarily prescribe, as was suggested perhaps by my friend Mr. Minaj, Councillor Minaj over here, but we set the stage and we provide the incentives, and then as the projects are proposed by developers and in their areas, we look at any changes to zoning or bylaws that need to be done. That's the way I presume. And I'll ask Jay if I got the concept right. But before I do, just when I'm reading through it, I said I saw that it was, if we go ahead with this, that it would be retroactive to the beginning of this year. Does that coincide with when it was conceptualized, or how was that date arrived upon? Because I know that we have at least two hotel/conference center proposals, and we have a couple of at least one medium-rise commercial/residential that were proposed prior to January 1st. So would those developers be not qualifiable for this program?
So the first question first, if I may, is that yes, you've conceptualized what we intended, or what I intended with the draft plan, is that this would enable the town to set up the program so that as a development comes in, it doesn't quite meet the zoning, they'd still amend the zoning bylaw to facilitate their project, and then the grant or whatever project, whatever financial incentive we were offering can then be proffered to the developer. On the part about the retroactivity, we picked that date because that was the date the Economic Development Strategic Plan presented as a recommendation, a preparation of a CIP. And so while it's retroactive, it's intended to be retroactive based on when they would get a building permit. So neither of those projects that you identified related to the hotel have applied for anything yet. They've just announced their intention to come to the town. And that may or may not happen.
Okay, so I think what I'll do now is ask if anybody from the public, I know you've been standing there for a while patiently, but please just state your name and we'll hear your comments. If you just want to come and push the blue, yeah, so everybody can hear.
Yeah. Tom Evans, and I'm actually just here. I'm part of one of the groups that is proposing one of the hotel developments, and it's these economic improvement plan that you have on the table are very important. Like they're inexpensive projects to do, and they represent a significant cost savings, and which does help entice businesses to this area. Having talked to some other developers myself, and I realize that some of them are scared off by some of the charges hanging over their heads, and they will look at, other areas to go to. So it's something to consider. It represents a significant savings too, and just to entice the people here. So I just wanted to say it. Obviously, I would like to see it come through and come to fruition. So, all I have to say.
Thank you, Tom. Just turn it off. Is there any other member of the public who would like to speak to the committee on our community improvement plan? Okay, let's have some discussion. I'll go Vice Deputy Mayor Huber.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I would ask if we might consider isolating out the affordable housing stuff for its own document, because there seems to be a lot of great ideas in here that you can see how there's some real incentives or enticements, as we just heard, that would be there for them. The affordable housing question is so much bigger that I think it's sort of worthy of its own document, that we try and work with other levels of government and get something that at least has a chance of providing some incentive. And housing is a little different than manufacturing businesses, nuclear support service businesses, or tourism related or other accommodation. So that would be one of my suggestions. But I wanted to just say that there were a couple of points in here that I just wanted to make mention of. One was about this idea that the town would be in a position to buy or sell or whatever with land. It's now almost the end of this term of council for this particular group of councillors, and we've been asking since the first of this term to have a closed session where we actually got a chance to look at the land inventory and have some discussion. So I would just encourage that, prior to the end of this term of council, we finally get to have that meeting because, it's mentioned in here and there's some merit to some of those kinds of discussions occurring, but we as a council have not yet had a chance to do that. I also had questions about the retroactive part, so Councillor Mayette's question was appreciated. Not completely satisfied with the answer yet, but I'll just keep learning about it. I note, though, that the document mentions in a couple of places about repairing, rehabilitation, and redevelopment. However, there seems to be this emphasis or focus, as you're reading it, more so on new people coming to town and whatever. And I guess I would just like us to try and find a way to have some enticements or some encouragements built into this that would give existing businesses a greater sense that there's maybe a little piece of this pie that they could attach themselves to as well, because they already chose to invest here, and they have invested here, some of them for many, many years, and their investments are worthwhile too, and perhaps some of them are at a point where they're willing to ante up and invest further, and I think it's part of this, but it's not really obvious, and so I just would like to sort of make that perhaps a little bit stronger, have something in there that's specific to repairing and rehabbing. The part, though, about hotel and visitor accommodation, this idea about a place greater than or equal to 50 rooms and containing a convention center meeting space, I'd be curious to know of the existing facilities in town. I suspect there's only one, possibly two of them that would sort of match that criteria right now. One of those particular places we've had some pretty serious issues with. So are we confident that with what this is, that we can somehow have the ability to question or challenge applications that might fit into this, but also might have some connections to other aspects of municipal business too. So I'll just leave that thought. I do have, my biggest concern though is that we have an existing base of business owners and property owners who I'd like us to be a little more obvious that there might be something in this for them, because they have paid taxes here for a long time, and it will be their tax dollars that would go to fund this. And I would ask that we consider separating out affordable housing and having a complete document specific to that. And in saying that, I know that my parents, the last big provincial funding, they were able to convert their house into apartments, and there were restrictions on how much rent they could charge. That was a lot of years ago. There hasn't been a program like that since, and I haven't seen a lot of that kind of conversion going on. And we created 4 units, or my parents did, so they wouldn't have fit into this, but I think that there's some bigger residential units here that could easily be 3 or 4 units. That I think there's a bigger question there and better opportunities for success. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to echo Vice Deputy Mayor Huber's request for an affordable housing, like a separate study of that. I think one of the it's not a unique challenge, but it's a special challenge that we face here with our seasonal housing, and the fact that we have the cottages that can be available to people, perhaps for a fairly affordable housing source for part of the year, but then once summer comes, they're basically turfed out, so people can get those big weekly rental fees that they get for seasonal housing, for cottage rental. And I think I'm not sure, I just think we have to acknowledge that in our policy and make sure that we somehow take that into account, that that's an added pressure that faces us, or that we face with our affordable housing conundrum, I guess. Thanks.
Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. And once again, I'd like to express my support for this type of program, and I've heard now 2 times from my 2 councillor friends on the right here that that we should separate out the affordable housing bit, and I'm not grasping the concept of why we would want to do that, other than if we were going to exempt some of the other portions of the existing document. If there was somebody had a problem with the hotel portion of it, or the manufacturing portion of it, or some of the other things that we dearly need to incentivize. Our town is in shortage of those, as well as we are in acute shortage of affordable rental and affordable housing. So the concept of removing it, I don't think I could support that without understanding what that would accomplish to have a separate affordable housing CIP and a CIP for industrial, commercial, and institutional. So I don't see the need for that. I had another thing that I was going to ask. About the DC bylaw. So Jay, you said that you were this would require some changes to the development charges bylaw. Now it occurs to me we just approved a new development charges bylaw in the last 12 months, maybe less, 10 months ago, 22 months ago, was that? Okay, we did, but in the term here, and we're required to do that every 5 years. If we were to make changes to our DC bylaw, would that constitute a clock reset of that 5-year DC renewal?
Yes, the short answer is yes. You could review the DC bylaw at any time, and then you can implement it for no more than 5-year periods.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. First, I support this. I support this policy. It's a good document and well structured. Of course, the only value that these community improvement plans have is in the implementation. At this point, it's just a bunch of policies. We have 2 CIPs right now, not much of which are implemented. So the key step is to actually put some money behind these things and implement these policies, which I'm encouraged to hear that your plan is to bring things forward as soon as possible. And that's why, in my view, we need to pass it as soon as possible so we can begin to implement some of these things rather than parse it apart. I think everything we need from the CIP is in this document. The CIP is only a very broad, very high-level document. It's not an implementation document. So, I agree with the Vice Deputy Mayor and Councillor Grace that we need more detail on affordable housing. We need to, I think Jay has said as much as well, that more detail ought to come and should come, but it can come as part of the implementation policies that will come out of the CIP when they come back to us and say, here's the policy we want you to enact to affect the CIP. Here's what we want, precisely what we want you to do, and here's why we want you to do it, right? And so I think that, it's important for us to get this CIP enacted so that staff can move on to the next stage of bringing us those policies or those documents, at least, that will enact the CIP so that we can move along. Because as Jay rightly pointed out in his report, a lot of this stuff is happening on the ground right now. I mean, people are looking to do this work, whatever it is, new businesses, new nuclear support businesses, parties interested in building affordable housing or building housing in general. It's happening today, and we need to position ourselves today to make the most of that. And so I think this is the right thing to do, and we should get it enacted. The one comment I would make it's an additional thing that I would like to see, and perhaps it can come in a later iteration of the CIP, or perhaps it falls into the document as it is now. But I wonder, the item C under the objectives to attract new businesses to Saugeen Shores, which is great. I mean, a great objective. But there are some specific businesses that we need, businesses that are support businesses to allowing the rest of business growth to take place. Daycares, for example. We need daycares. desperately. There's some in the works, which is great. They're not built yet. Some of them are under construction. But I have every anticipation we need more, much more, even than what's planned. If we're going to have 5,000 more people, we need a lot more daycares. We need to go out and recruit those. I mean, we need to make sure those happen. We need to do whatever we can under this community improvement plan as part of a policy to target that type of business. And that's just one example, I think, of a few. Transportation. I just heard, I was at the Council on Aging thing here upstairs in Rotary Hall a month ago or so, and they were talking about busing. They can't get a bus to London. You can't get a bus to London from Port Elgin. And I know that, getting out of town, I mean, people ask, is that really what we want to encourage? But that's an important transit connection that gets people to the hospital, right? That, people who don't have cars, right? I mean, people need to go to London to do things, and they can't get there right now. That's a business, a private business. Cherry Bus Lines runs out of Port Elgin right now. Maybe others could. That we could potentially through a CIP look to incentivize to provide more service in this community, to provide things that are necessary to support business growth and residential growth in the community. So, I mean, those are just two that I can just think of sort of pressing ones. Daycare obviously is one that's pressing on my mind all the time. That's why I'm always thinking about it. But there's others. And so I wonder, Jay, maybe you could just make a comment to me about, do you think that being able to do that is in here already? To go out and take whatever actions we need to do to recruit specific businesses, identify first what the needs are, and then remove the barriers, spend the money, whatever it takes to recruit them? Or is it something we need to add?
So there's maybe three parts that I'd like to just emphasize. One is overall, nothing in the plan or the legislation at the that enables us to do this precludes the town from amending or otherwise including this in the future. So I just want to keep that as an overall. It's not this is the only time you'll do it and then you'll wait 5 years. You could at any time where need arises. The second is on the implementation of the programs themselves. Nothing precludes the town from developing very nuanced approaches to affordable housing, for example, where in the development of the program, we target very specific style of affordable housing as long as we meet the minimum standard of getting 5 units, or that it's part of a basement apartment, or those sorts of things. And so I guess, re-emphasize that is that though we don't have that detail now, it's important enough that we hit the ground running in 2018, and that it's in my draft of the implementation report that we'd bring a multi-year comprehensive implementation plan that you could implement over the life of the CIP to lay out your financial commitments and how you specifically want to see support for the identified activities. And I guess in the third one, and more specifically to the question of daycares and busing, is no, this plan doesn't specifically have that, but I go back to the first part. You can amend it later at any time to include those activities. The reason they're not included now is because I don't feel I have the support of the Economic Development Strategic Plan, which was the very tangible, specific document that I could use to support the CIP. It said those specific activities, and it was very straightforward, whereas something like busing is maybe a little more indirect. I'd need some other document that does that. However, I just popped in my head, emphasize that it's just one tool of many that the town could have. So if on the busing issue or daycare, there may be other programs available for the town to take advantage of, and I don't know them off the top of my head, but I'm sure they exist.
Mr. Barron, thank you, Jay, for that. I just wonder, is it, in terms of process, is it too late at this stage, without delaying you too badly, to add something at this point, or is it better from your perspective to allow this to pass as it is and then return with amendments? I think it's something that would be wise to. The only reason I raise it, I think it would be something wise to identify as an objective in the CIP. To say, we would like to. Not to talk about daycares and busing, but to say instead identify specific businesses that are necessary for the economic development of the community and to attract them to the community. But as I said, my first point, which is the most important one, and I agree, I'd like to see this passed and I don't want to delay it. So if it's in your view that it's better to move forward and then double back with changes that this council or another council may see fit, is that the better approach?
I would say I can do both. So I'm going to hold my tongue and say by the next meeting, if I can't get the change in, I'd say you can still double back, and as long as it's not part of the restricted powers imposed on council during a certain period.
Councilor Rich?
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Mayor. Thanks a lot, Jay. Good work. I think anything that we can do to encourage business to locate to our area and make it easier for businesses here is a great idea, whether it's for existing businesses or otherwise. I think I agree with the Deputy Mayor that the devil is always in the details of these things and how you implement them. And the quicker we can get to that stage, the better for everyone. We did the Economic Development Strategic Plan. One of the biggest issues that came forward was affordable housing from a business perspective, because there's lots of businesses in our community that need lower paid employees who cannot afford to live here. So I think that is actually a big part of our business economic development as we kind of move forward. And maybe this is true to you, Mr. Mayor, or Jay. Did we not have an affordable housing program through Bruce County at one point that was trying to encourage development here?
Bruce County has a plan, an ongoing plan for affordable housing throughout the county and here specifically. There's a number, I'll speak to that later, but there's a number of programs available to try and address the affordable housing, and the county developed a 10-year strategy with some specific goals about numbers, and they're meeting those numbers. But they've gone out, I think, there's some, and I don't want to cut you off, but I will speak a little bit about affordable housing. I think you really need to understand the barriers to why you can't get affordable housing in the community. And I think the county is very, they've worked for a number of years in this. So, I mean, they've got a lot of information all around what the needs are, what developers are saying to you, and then how you try and make it happen, because it's, and I would say that's, I think there's certain things we can do inside legislatively. We get the authority through a community improvement plan, but there may be things that we could partner with the county on to move this affordable housing. But I don't think you'd want to take it out of the community improvement plan, because that's where you get the authority to do some of the things that would allow you to address affordable housing. So I think it needs to be part of the plan. But I would also say, I think I agree it's a big issue, and we perhaps should work and talk to the people of the county, because they know the barriers and they know the trouble, and it's not just as easy as some of the. I mean, we just solved this problem a long time ago. It always comes down to money. It always comes down to money. Simple as that. So go ahead.
And with that in mind, that's the only suggestion that I was going to make is just basically what he just got done saying, that we have to make sure that whatever plan or whatever implementation stage we go through works in conjunction with what we've already got going on, and we're not sort of doubling up, adding an incentive that's already in place, and actually talk with Bruce County and find out what's working, what isn't working as we kind of implement this going forward. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Mike Bryant.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor, and I really do appreciate your comments about affordable housing and how difficult it can be. And I see we're 377 applicants in the report, on that list needing affordable housing, and 50% of which are from Saugeen Shores. So it's a big number, and but I'm pleased to see that we're potentially attacking that whole thing. And I know Councilor Minaj has spoke passionately about this over the years and continues to. And I think we all need to be talking about affordable housing and the need for it. And hopefully we can get there and provide incentives to our investors to get things done. And I want to thank you for the report. Jay did a really good job on it. And I agree with our Deputy Mayor and that we need to approve this sooner than later and move on with it. And I think at the last council meeting I spoke to the need for a financial plan to talk about what kinds of costs we are looking at in terms of what those incentive costs could be. So that obviously is important. But I just want to thank Tom Evans, for your presentation, Tom, and you and Jennifer. I don't think it was long ago that you were awarded the Super 8 Top 8 Brass Award, Top 8 Award, not the Brass Award, but the Top 8 Award. I think it was a few years back, and it's exciting to think about investors locally, like yourself, that are willing to invest in another significant project. People obviously do it right. And I think that as a council, I'll be supporting, I believe anyways, that if we can provide incentives to investors for significant projects like a brand new 50 or 60 unit hotel, I think that's a step in the right direction. So I want to congratulate you again, and hopefully we can get that happening in our community. We're on the verge of, just speaking with Jessica Linthorne and Jay, I mean, we're on the verge of attracting some pretty exciting investors into this community, and if there's anything we can do to provide some incentives to move some of those projects forward, then let's do it. So I agree. Let's get this thing approved sooner than later. And I guess I had one question through you, Mr. Mayor, to Jay, and perhaps the CAO, but the financial plan that it would outline the incentive costing, cost for those incentives. How soon, Jay, assuming this plan gets approved in the very near future, how soon could we see the costing that could be associated with the incentives that we're talking about in your plan? Is it in the next month or two? And secondly, is it conceivable that we could be looking at outside of the 2019 budget, the pre-approving before, like I'm talking about June, July, August? Is there still an opportunity for us to allocate some funds in 2018 for incentives to move this plan forward, or are we looking at a 2019 budget process?
Well, I think I can tell you that we had nothing in this year's budget for this. So, there was nothing in this year's budget.
Right, I understand, Mr. Mayor. I'm just wondering if staff have talked about it at management team level at all, about potentially fast-tracking some investment in 2018 to get this plan moving forward. So I'd just like to answer that question for me.
Mr. Mayor, we have talked about that and have ideas of where we could find funding, and Jay's program piece will come back with a funding recommendation for 2018.
Councilor Myatt?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. On the funding piece, some of the things that we're talking about are not necessarily outlays of taxpayers' money so much as they are giving a developer a potentially, it's less collecting. So like on development charge, so if you said to a developer, we're going to give you a percentage, 50% or 40% off of your development charges, then there wouldn't be a significant budgetary impact. It's just that we would collect less from those developers going forward. Is that not the concept that I'm got my head around?
Well, it has a budget impact. It's that it's measured, when you go to build that capital work that you're not collecting 100% of your DC on, you're going to have to come up with the funding at a future date. So it depends on how much you forego. Are you able to justify what you're foregoing with, say, the rapidity of the growth, or with some other, other scheme? I keep coming back to that word. And that's part of at least in the 2018, we want to show you where we think we can, at least in the short term, take it, and then have a commitment to preparing a more comprehensive budget program for future budgets.
Of your, or a reduction in your development charges was one thing, but it also mentioned you could discount on taxes for a period of time after it's developed. So that it really has a lot more downstream budgetary impact, so much as it would us having to allocate a certain amount of 2018 dollars towards this program. That's really where my head is at, is that you can incentivize things that are going to be not collected in the future, as opposed to saying we're going to rebate you stuff that you've already paid.
Well, I mean, I think Jay understands this, and I think he's got some ideas that will come back with some ideas about how you to do that. So I think you were going to speak next, Neil. We'll get Neil, then you. Then I think you want to go next.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Maybe I spoke out of turn earlier, but I'd like to explore a different line of thinking. no surprise, I suppose, that partnerships, you talked about partnerships and whether or not there's a paragraph that speaks about partnerships, aka Bruce County. But we have a neighboring community, Paisley, in Aaron Eldesley, for example, which is right up against our boundaries. And they're struggling to keep a school open and keep themselves vital, to listen to their locals speak. I know them quite well, and they would like to help us. And so when we get outside of the box here a little bit, sometimes thinking maybe they're sitting on a 100-home subdivision that they've got nobody to put the services in, and they're not moving that project ahead. They can't move it ahead because all the building is happening in Kincardine and Saugeen Shores. So my thought would be, talk about busing, and Luke's concept there is that is it so far out of the question to think that maybe affordable housing can exist in Paisley, and maybe our service industry that we so desperately need, those people who are at the minimum wage end of the spectrum, want to live in a home, and they want their children to go to a vital school as well. Maybe it takes place in Paisley, and it serves our needs, and maybe we could partner with Paisley through Bruce County and Aaron Eldesley and say, how can we help you help us? So if there's a role for partnerships, maybe you've already mentioned Bruce County. Maybe we can expand upon that and say, let's try a different model here. Let's try a model in our local area that could work for us. Build the affordable houses in another community where they could desperately use the people for their schools and their businesses, and we could use their workers to work in our community, and we may have to set up a shift bus route to do that coincides with all the service industry that we're blossoming in our community, and bus people in and out of our community so that they don't have to live here, but they want to work here, and that would be different.
Vice Deputy Mayor Huber, then over the side.
Thank you. Just for clarification, Jay, the CIP idea is the whole settlement area. There's very specific comments in there in the affordable housing piece about secondary suites. The idea is that this does not, the zoning bylaw still is above this. So because we've determined certain areas of town where secondary suites are not allowed, that's still in play with all of this, correct?
Yes, to be clear, you still have to meet all applicable law.
Okay. And the idea with secondary suites is that there's potential, although I know you haven't got all the details on paper for us to see yet, but if there was some sort of discounting of the fee for a development charge associated with a secondary suite, which probably a lot of people didn't even realize there was a development charge for a secondary suite, but based on a conversation I had with you, I learned that. It would mean that somebody who has an existing larger house who would then be interested in creating a secondary suite in a zone where it's possible, this sort of program would not impact them because they would be doing a conversion which does not have a development charge attached to it, correct?
Correct, insofar as if the town had a DC program, if we chose to implement another program like the building permit fee reduction, there may be a reduction in those charges as a means to support that type of development. But as you've correctly pointed out, the DCs are statutorily exempt for any converted dwellings.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just a quick question of clarification that occurred to me during the discussion about how we would pay for this or financing it. The sentence that Jay writes in here about contractors looking to be ready for a start date need to be selecting sites now and building within the next 6 to 10 months to be ready for that start date with regard to the MCR. And the concept that we have not budgeted any money in 2018 for this, the next 3 of the next 6 months, council's out of commission for approving any new funding. I just wonder if, could I get some, perhaps to the CAO maybe, some clarity or your comments on the ability of the administration over the next 6 months to incentivize development in accordance with the CIP, or to spend money outside the budget to do this. We're kind of in a critical time according to that timeline, and gosh, I'd hate to lose 3 months if that was avoidable. Perhaps your comments.
Yeah, I'll just comment briefly. I would like to consult with my colleagues before I know that there was a delegation of authority bylaw. We may want to revisit some elements of that.
So, any further questions and comments on this particular report? I think this is the public meeting, so if there's no other comments from the public, then we'll close this public meeting, and I guess you've got some information to hopefully move forward with, Jay. Yep. Thank you for your discussion, everyone. So the next item on the agenda then is a staff report on attached to with our proposed zoning amendments. And again, our Supervisor of Development Services, Jay Posner, will present it.
So if you recall, we did this about a year ago, and it worked out well from my perspective, so I'd like to approach this suite of amendments in the same way. So if staff would present some ideas we've been thinking about when it comes to amending the bylaw to make it more streamlined, more modern, more less confusing for landowners, and I just keep going. So we've identified a few issues that come up in the last year, and some have been identified by council. And the first one is for driveways. During the last round of amendments, staff wished to include a provision to allow 50% of the area of the front yard on residential lots to be devoted to parking, and this would align well with the current provision that the maximum driveway width of 50% of the lot frontage. And so, and from our perspective, there's minimal impacts by increasing the front yard area parking permission from 40 to 50%. Second is one that comes up from time to time. We'd like to create a authority for the CBO to enter into an agreement with landowners who want to build a second dwelling on the lot, and while they're constructing that second dwelling, live in the first and then demolish the first. You've seen this a couple times where we've typically done it by a temporary use zoning bylaw, but I think it's more appropriate to remove that structure and have it as a permanent provision of the bylaw subject to an agreement with the CBO. Look at removing some of the red tape associated with consents and severances, and remove residential minimum lot areas. So this would remove one provision of 10 or 12 that we regulate lot use of residential lots. And what it would do is that where there are adjustments during a consent application for, well, let me go back. In an R1 zone, for example, our minimum lot area is 500 square meters, so about 5,000 square feet. And oftentimes we see as part of a severance to create more residential land, a need to amend our zoning bylaw because they're at the 450 square meter lot size, or they're at 480 square meters. And so without picking another number lower than 500 and then just having to amend it again in the future, we'd remove the provision because I think there's already a number of provisions in the bylaw that help regulate lot design, and not just in the zoning bylaw, but in our official plan. There's policy that directs on how those lots get created and how we understand how they should be approved. And on the zoning side, we have frontage, so we're not recommending removal of the 50-foot frontage, for example, in an R1 zone. There's still requirements to have a minimum landscaped open space, maximum requirements for coverage, and then those things added up. A landowner, as long as they're aware of those things, still have to meet those requirements. So I don't think we're going to see a lot area of, say, 200 square meters, though if they can meet all those provisions, maybe it's appropriate. If they can satisfy the provisions of the official plan, such as compatibility with the surrounding neighborhood, and so on and so forth. on that same note, I guess I've also struggled that there are such a variety in the types of neighborhoods that we have, is that I don't think there is a sort of a baseline lot area, if you will, that can make it easy to suggest what an appropriate minimum lot area is. So it's not a reaction to say, well, let's just remove the provision. I just think we already have other tools that can ensure that we maintain the intent of our official plan when we're creating residential lots. Exterior side yard setback in an R2 zone. Well, this is maybe something we overlooked, but we amended the bylaw last year to allow for a reduction in the R1 zone of the exterior side from 6 to 4.5, and this would be a similar request on the R2 zone. Looking on the lot coverage for R3 and R4 zones, these are the townhouse zones generally, so we would propose an increase in lot coverage for these lands from 35 to 50%, and this allows us more flexibility in housing design to meet housing needs for all ages and in the environments typically found in our settlement area. And it would be applied to a lot as a maximum, not as a coverage requirement, so there's still options for end units to be under 50%, but it's generally the interior units that just by their nature have a larger lot coverage than their end units. Something we're circling back on is the food trucks and commercial core. Learned some lessons over the last couple months related to how they get regulated, so rather than dig myself a hole any deeper, I propose to put an amendment in the zoning bylaw as I've written here, with further regulations to be updated in the business licensing bylaw. New provisions in the institutional zone. This is part of just another arrow in our quiver to allow for, during the MCR ramp up, to allow municipal buildings to, subject to lease and rental agreements, to allow excess space in our buildings to be rented to offices. Our current zoning bylaw doesn't allow that, but we would like to have that flexibility. And then a couple of mapping provisions. One is on Bruce Road 25 to address sort of the built form. There's the zone line, if you measured it by the current standard, would be right in the middle of a driveway and some landscaping. So let's just correct this. This addresses a bit of a long-standing issue with this landowner to make sure this error is corrected. And then the second mapping change is to reflect that water and sewer are both available on Fenton Drive, and that the standard zone provision that requires a special setback for septic purposes can be removed, and just have them built as per our normal R1 zone standards. And those are the requested amendments.
So I'll read the recommendation and then we'll take any questions or comments. So the recommendation is that Council direct staff to proceed with the Planning Act process to amend the zoning bylaws. Comments? I'll start with Councillor Grace.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jay, my question is about the food truck regulation. Will current trucks have to comply with this as well?
No, this is the zoning bylaw amendment, so current trucks are regulated under the current bylaw and the current licensing bylaw. So in my view, some of the trucks may receive a legal non-conforming status by amending this bylaw, unless we have a business licensing bylaw that compels them to remove the trucks. And I think that's part of the proposed future bylaw changes to the business licensing, to ensure that we can regulate them appropriately.
Councillor Dave Mayette.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Jay, my question has to do with the news for industrial zone. When I read this, I thought it meant that we could take buildings that are currently zoned industrial, say something in the industrial zone, park next door, and convert them into office space. But you tended to zone in on the, to use the term, zone in on the second sentence, which was municipal-owned buildings that we could convert to rental. The first part of it, I think, is wholly appropriate, and I think probably the second part is appropriate too. But can you identify which municipal buildings we have that may or may not be available to be converted into office space?
So I don't know all the availability, but this is just the institutional zone land. So the one that's been brought to my attention is the land north of the medical building north of the Southampton Hospital. That might have some surplus space. Right now, we're restricted on who it can be rented to. It has to be compliant with a use in the institutional zone, but there may be other buildings. Perhaps this building has some surplus space. I'm not sure. police station is zoned institutional, yes.
Deputy Mayor Sherman.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I had comments on two of these. The one, I'll start with the food truck one. I like what is there, although I'm not convinced it goes quite far enough. Permitting food trucks in the core commercial zone on lots that do not have any vacancies makes sense. But the one thing that I've been mentioning over and over again as part of this discussion, as it's been going on for a number of months, is a concern that I have about something that has not happened yet, but which I don't wish to see happen. And I've learned as part of this process that if you don't wish to see something happen and have it remain, that you should nip it in the bud before it occurs. Otherwise, you'll have to be left to live with it. So the thing that I'm concerned about is a lot becomes vacant completely in the core commercial zone, and food trucks become the primary use in that you have an empty lot because a building was demolished or for whatever reason, and somebody pulls a food truck in there, and that's what they decide to run in there. And right now you could do that, and I would rather see that not be possible. I'm wondering if it would be possible to have, as part of the amendment, something that says a food truck cannot be the primary use on a lot in the core commercial zone. So I think what you have in here makes sense, and I support all of it. It would just be the addition of that one restriction, that it would have to be a secondary use and not a primary use. I'm not sure if that language works in your world, but something along those lines to get to that outcome. Maybe I'll let you respond to that, and then I have one more on another topic.
My world makes me sound like I'm in
you have a
different planet.
Live in your own world.
What I guess several months ago we intended to bring sought approval to amend the licensing bylaw because I felt it was most appropriate, because I think the zoning bylaw does a really bad job of regulating these things, but I'm told maybe we don't necessarily have the authority without something in their zoning bylaw. And part of the reason I'm still reticent to go too far on this is because their zoning bylaw still establishes rights to a developer, builder, landowner, that once a use is established, they have that right forever. And I get the concern. And so I'm willing to consider how food trucks may not be a primary use. I don't know how the zoning bylaw specifically can prevent, say, the demolition of a business after the food truck is established. As an example, if they put a food truck in a successful business, then the one business is closed. Does the food truck continue? I'm not sure, but I'd be willing to write in for the sake of the bylaw to try it, because I don't know what other provision to write.
I'd like to see some exploration of that anyway before this goes on, because I think that it's just something that has concerned me right from the very beginning, and I'd like to see us try to address it. The other issue is with regard to, let me scroll to it, residential minimum lot areas. The creation of new lots in the residential zone has been an area of some not limited controversy in the town of Saugeen Shores in a few important areas over the last couple of years. I think we're going to need to, it's a question of outcomes, and the outcomes that we're achieving are not the outcomes, at least from what I'm hearing, that lots of people in the community would like to see us achieve. And so if we look at it from that standpoint of what outcomes do we want, and clearly character of residential neighborhoods is an important issue for people. And if that's the outcome, and we need to get closer to, I think we need to get closer to what the public wants, not only from the public standpoint, but from the standpoint of developers who look at our documents and then come to this council on the basis of what's in those documents, expecting approval, and then don't get approval because the public doesn't like what the outcomes the documents produce. So the documents themselves, the policies, are out of step with the public's, with what the public that they are intended to serve. So the problem, therefore, I think means that we need a more comprehensive review of those documents, right? We need to go back to the beginning, understand, you made the comment to me earlier today, and it's a good comment, that there's a lot of lack of understanding, and I'll put my hand up as being among the people who fail to understand sometimes. But we need better understanding, and then we need to know when we make changes what the effect of those changes are going to be. And so look at the whole thing holistically and see how it plays out for outcome in terms of outcomes. So I'm a little reticent to, at this stage, eliminate one specific regulation out of all of that, because I don't know. It's a lack of understanding thing. I don't know what the impact of that is in terms of the outcome. And I know, and if it would be one thing, if this was an area where there wasn't much community concern, because I'm always in favor of reducing red tape. But in this area, this is an area of a great deal of community concern, and I'm concerned about, well, let's just hack out this regulation and see what happens. Because I don't, you probably understand better what will happen. I have a lack of understanding. So that's one I'm really having trouble with supporting at this stage. I'm not suggesting it's something I could never support, but perhaps it is. In the context of a broader review, maybe it makes sense. But I'd like to see the broader review first before this one got pushed through. And frankly, I don't think it's so pressing that it would have to be dealt with today before we did a broader review of that particular issue. So I have to, that particular item limits my willingness to vote in favor of the recommendation. Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Minaj.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. If I could, back to the Deputy Mayor and to all of us. I shopped at Southside Fries on the weekend. They make good fries. There's no doubt in my mind that that's a food truck attached to an existing building that had different use. You don't know what I'm talking about? I'm sorry, I didn't understand. It's not in the core commercial. I understand that, but my point would be that it's still, it's defeated somehow managed to defeat all of the site plan control. There's no delineated parking lot. There's no lighting. There's a whole bunch of stuff that went on with that development, and it was a trailer. It is a trailer. If you go in and purchase fries from it, you're purchasing fries from a food trailer. So it's not in the core commercial, but it is another ingenious method that seems to have gotten around all of our planning wants and needs for commercial development. So maybe when you suggest that we have a greater look at that, at what your proposal, core commercial, maybe we need to have a broader look at how these things can manifest themselves outside of core commercial as well.
Okay. Any other comments? I guess this idea around if you need some more explanation about what the objective is around this residential minimum lot areas, I could perhaps bring that back. But I really understand what you're trying to do, and I don't see anything wrong with it, really. I mean, there's all kinds of other ways that you control that minimum lot size. We don't need to be redundant many times, but in any case, we can. I would say bring it back and go ahead.
This just to further understand maybe the recommendation. What staff is asking us to do is for you to proceed with the Planning Act process. That means what we're doing in effect at this moment is formalizing these set of proposed amendments for a public review process, and then we'll return again for formal approval, right, and debate at that time. So we can look at them one at a time after the public review process, and vote them up and down if we want to, or parse them out. That would be agreeable. I'm not keen on holding you up on all this stuff. I know there's lots of good stuff in here, and I don't really want to. So there's an opportunity for council to decide on these at a later point.
There is. I guess what I'm seeking is if there's something you really don't want to proceed with, it'd save me time too, you know. But if you're happy with preparing an amendment and we get the consultation part, then that's fine.
I would like not to proceed with that one. Is there a way, Mr. Mayor, that we could give that I could ask council to give direction on that one?